All right, let's dive in. Today we're looking at a pretty powerful chapter from the Quran, chapter 44, smoke. It really gives us a window into some core Islamic beliefs about life, death, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and it's a chapter, that's super rich with symbolism and imagery, which really kind of makes those beliefs come alive.
Okay, so how does it do that?
Well, I think it goes beyond, just like straightforward statements of faith. It uses like these really captivating stories to drive home its points, drawing the reader in and kind of making them think.
So right from the start, it emphasizes that this chapter was revealed on a, quote, blessed night. I mean, why is that detail so important? Like, why not just say it was revealed?
Well, I think saying blessed night, really highlights that this isn't just any ordinary revelation. It's like pointing to a specific time, like a time chosen by God for its importance, right? It's like taking the message to like a divine level of communication.
Wow, that's powerful. So it's like saying, hey, listen up, this is important. And then boom, it jumps right into all these warnings. What are some of the specific warnings that we're seeing and who are they directed at?
Yeah, well, the warnings are, they're pretty serious, and they're for everyone, for all of humanity. The chapter talks about this coming day of judgment. It calls it a day of sorting out, where, everyone is held accountable for what they've done. And the way it describes this day, it's pretty intense. It talks about like smoke that's, enveloping all of mankind, like symbolizing this painful punishment.
That's an interesting image, the smoke. Like, what do you think the chapter's trying to say with that?
Yeah, I think the smoke, it could represent a lot of different things. Like literally, maybe it's describing some kind of, physical wrath of God.
Mm-hmm.
But symbolically, maybe it's more about like confusion or fear, or maybe even how truth gets obscured when people stray from the right path. Remember, it's a chapter, full of contrasts and the smoke. It's like the total opposite of that clarity and peace that, the righteous people are offered.
So it's deeper than just, fire and brimstone. It's about what happens in our minds and spirits because of the choices we make.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this idea of, like, everyone being responsible for what they do, that really hits home when the text says that on this day, nobody can help anyone else, except for those who have earned God's mercy.
Yeah, no, for sure. The text really emphasizes that, we're each responsible for ourselves and that our choices matter. Like it's saying we can't just rely on someone else to save us. We have to actually try to live a righteous life.
Yeah.
And this whole idea of individual accountability, well, it's illustrated even more through the story of Moses and Pharaoh, which is like, front and center in this chapter.
Right. The story of Moses and Pharaoh is such a classic, and in Smoke, it's really woven in to make a very specific point. Like, how does it present their story, and how does that connect to this theme of being accountable for our actions?
Well, the chapter portrays Pharaoh as this, like, embodiment of arrogance and defiance, someone who completely rejects God's message, the one that Moses brings.
Right.
He's shown as someone who only cares about, like, worldly power and refuses to submit to any kind of higher authority. He just ignores all the warnings. And because of that, well, he faces the consequences.
So he refuses to listen, and it all leads to his downfall, right?
Oh, exactly. The chapter describes how Pharaoh is pursued by, it says by God's power, and ultimately he drowns. It's like this stark warning about what can happen when you choose arrogance and selfishness over humility and obedience to something bigger than yourself.
It's like that saying, he who digs a pit for others falls in himself. And that, that brings us to the different destinies that are laid out for sinners and the righteous. The chapter doesn't hold back on those vivid descriptions of what awaits both groups.
Oh, yeah. This is where, like, the poetic language of the Quran, it really shines. It paints these pictures of the afterlife, and they're both terrifying and beautiful at the same time. So for the sinners, you have the tree of bitterness, right, with fruit that just tastes awful. And instead of cool water, to quench their thirst, they get molten lead that, like, boils in their stomachs.
It's powerful imagery, It goes beyond simply saying sinners will be punished. It's like it's trying to evoke a visceral reaction, forcing you to really confront, like, the potential consequences of your actions.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not just about informing, right? It's trying to transform you. It wants to stir something deep inside, to make you want to make different choices, to choose the path that leads to peace instead of all that torment.
And for the righteous, it paints a very different picture, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Instead of torment, you have peace. The righteous, they're promised this secure place with gardens and springs where they can just, like, chill and enjoy every kind of fruit in peace, dressed in silk and brocade. It evokes this sense of abundance, beauty, harmony with nature, which is such a stark contrast to the barrenness and suffering described for the sinners.
Yeah, it's like two different worlds existing side by side. This contrast between molten lead and gardens and springs, between silk and brocade and the tree of bitterness.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the chapter's trying to say. It's saying the choices we make now, in this life, they have a huge impact on what our experience will be like in the afterlife. It's a call to really think about what matters most and to try to live in a way that's true to our deepest values.
So it's not just like a bunch of abstract rules or philosophy. It's like a practical guide to living a good life, a life that leads to something positive, for ourselves and for the people around us.
And what's really interesting is that these descriptions of paradise and punishment, even though they're rooted in Islamic beliefs, they kind of resonate with universal human desires and fears, like wanting peace and beauty and being afraid of suffering and regret. These are themes that everyone can relate to regardless of their religion.
So even if someone doesn't know anything about Islam, they can still connect with what this chapter is saying, right?
Right.
They can find meaning in how it explores the consequences of our actions and the possibility of, choosing a path that leads to peace and fulfillment.
Exactly, yeah. And the text actually talks about this idea of accessibility, where it says the message is revealed in your language so that people can understand and remember it. It's it's saying this wisdom isn't meant to be hidden away like in some secret book, but it's meant for everyone to grasp and use in their lives.
So we've talked about this blessed night, all the warnings, the story of Moses and Pharaoh, and the different fates of sinners and the righteous. We've gone through a whole range of emotions and ideas, already. What's next on our journey through smoke?
Well, there's one more really important theme we need to unpack: divine mercy. Even with all the warnings and descriptions of punishment, there's this thread of hope that runs through the entire chapter.
Oh, that's interesting. It's trying to find this balance between, justice and mercy, between holding people accountable for their actions, but also giving them a chance to redeem themselves. Let's explore that a bit more.
It's a tough balance. On one hand, the chapter makes it super clear that what you do has consequences, and those can be, really serious. But then on the other hand, it's saying that God's mercy, that has no limits. So it's like a glimmer of hope, even when it's talking about punishment.
Yeah, it reminds me of when a parent is disciplining a child,
Yeah.
There's that firm hand, those clear rules about right and wrong, but you also know there's love there and they want their kid to make the right choices.
That's a great way to put it. It really captures that complicated relationship between, us as humans and the divine, how this chapter portrays it. It's not just about fear or blindly obeying, It acknowledges that we're capable of good and bad, that we make mistakes, but can also ask for forgiveness.
So how does smoke actually weave in this idea of mercy? Are there specific verses that really jump out at you?
Oh, for sure. There are a few. Verse 33 says, if only they had repented and believed and followed the guidance. It's hinting that even if strayed from the path, you can still find redemption. How? Repentance, belief, and following divine guidance. Those are the keys.
That's a powerful message of hope, It's like saying it's never too late to turn things around, to seek forgiveness and try to live a better life. It's not about being perfect, but always striving to be better.
Exactly. And that idea really connects with a core principle in Islam.
Yeah.
That Allah is Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, the most compassionate and the most merciful. So even when it's describing punishment, there's this underlying sense of compassion, it's inviting you to turn back to God and seek that forgiveness.
It's like a lifeline for those who are drowning in their mistakes, a reminder that even when things are at their darkest, there's still a light to guide you back.
And it's not just for individuals, it's for all of humanity. Remember, the warnings in this chapter, they're for everyone, no matter what they believe or where they come from. It's not trying to exclude people. It's about encouraging everyone to think about their choices and look for a path that leads to something good, both for themselves and the world around them.
That's important, right? It's not about judgment or creating divisions. It's about encouraging everyone to look inward and strive to be better. But going back to Moses and Pharaoh, it seems like they're opposite destinies. Well, they really represent what happens when you choose or reject the path of righteousness. Do you think that's an accurate reading?
It's definitely one way to look at it. Pharaoh, with his arrogance and defiance, he's like the ultimate example of rejecting divine authority. And we see what happens because of that. He's so attached to power, ignores all the signs and warnings, and it leads to his downfall. Moses, on the other hand, well, he represents submitting to something greater than himself. He's humble before God, and his life is about service and righteousness.
It's like pride comes before the fall, right? It seems like Pharaoh's arrogance blinded him to the truth, and that's what sent him down that destructive path. Moses, though, he chose humility and obedience, and ultimately he became a guide, like a beacon of light for his people. But what about this day of sorting out? Is it just about punishment and reward, or is there something deeper going on with this cosmic reckoning?
Ooh, good question. The chapter definitely describes what happens to the righteous and the sinners. But this day of sorting out, it also represents, I think, ultimate justice being served and everyone being held accountable. Like, it's a reminder that what we do has consequences that go way beyond just us, and that in the end, truth and righteousness, they'll win out.
So it's not just about personal gain or loss. It's like a cosmic balancing act, restoring harmony and order to the universe.
Exactly. And that idea of cosmic justice being served, you see that in lots of spiritual traditions, right?
Yeah.
This idea that we're all connected, our actions ripple outwards, and ultimately we all have a responsibility to create a world that reflects justice, compassion, and peace.
It's like that famous quote from Martin Luther King Jr., "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." We're all part of a bigger picture, and what we do, good or bad, affects everything.
And the day of sorting out, how it's described in Smoke, it really highlights that interconnectedness. It makes you think about the long-term consequences of what we do, and encourages us to live in a way that aligns with our best selves, not just for us, but for everyone in the world we live in.
It's saying that we are all accountable, not just to ourselves or to God, but to each other as well.
Exactly. It's a call for shared responsibility, a reminder that we're all in this together. And Smoke weaves this message of individual and collective accountability beautifully throughout the chapter, using warnings, stories, and vivid imagery.
It's incredible how much depth and complexity can fit into such a short chapter. We've already uncovered so many layers of meaning, and yet I feel like we've only just begun to explore it all.
There's definitely more to discover. And what's really interesting is that Smoke doesn't offer simple answers or easy solutions. It makes us wrestle with these big questions about life, death, justice, and mercy. It challenges us to confront our own biases, to look inward, and to ultimately choose a path that's true to our values.
It's not trying to tell us what to think, right? It's more about encouraging us to think for ourselves, to question, to explore, and to find our own understanding of these truths.
Exactly. And encouraging that critical thinking and personal reflection, that's a powerful message in itself. It recognizes that real faith isn't about just blindly accepting things, but about seeking understanding and trying to live in a way that reflects what you truly believe.
So, as we continue to explore Smoke, let's keep that spirit of inquiry alive. Let's be open to different interpretations, to challenging our own assumptions, and to embracing the complexity of this text.
Couldn't agree more. Let's see where this journey of discovery takes us.
It's kind of wild how Smoke, even though it's so old, still feels so relevant today. Like, we're still wrestling with those same questions about accountability, justice, the kind of world we're building,
Yeah, and the way it frames these timeless concerns, it's really fascinating. It doesn't shy away from showing what happens when we do bad stuff, both individually and as a society, but it also shows us a way forward, a way to get back on track with truth and righteousness.
We talked about those intense descriptions of punishment, right? The tree of bitterness, the molten lade. Those images, they stick with you. But the chapter doesn't just end there, does it?
No, not at all. It could have easily just been about fear, But Smoke goes deeper. It keeps emphasizing Allah's mercy, which suggests there's always a chance for redemption, a way to turn back toward a better path.
It makes me think about how we often see justice and mercy as opposites, but in Smoke, they seem kind of intertwined, almost like two sides of the same coin. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a really interesting point. And I think it shows how complex the idea of divine justice is in Islam. It's not just about punishing people for their wrongs. It recognizes that humans could grow, they can change, they can ask for forgiveness and make things right.
So it's not a you messed up, now you're doomed forever kind of situation. There's always that possibility of changing course, of finding that balance and harmony with the divine again.
Exactly. And that's where the concept of tawbah comes in, which is often translated as repentance. It's not just about feeling bad about what you did wrong. It's about actively turning away from those bad actions, seeking forgiveness, and making a real effort to change your behavior.
So even with all the warnings and descriptions of punishment, there's this message of like empowerment, right? It's saying we have the power to choose a different path, to shape our own destiny, both individually and as a whole.
Oh, absolutely. And it ties back to how the chapter begins, with that emphasis on the blessed night. That moment of revelation, it's not just about setting rules, it's about offering guidance, shining a light on the path toward a better way of living.
It's like saying, here's the map, it's going to be tough, but you have what it takes to navigate it and ultimately reach a place of peace and fulfillment.
I love that. And it brings us back to the story of Moses and Pharaoh, which is such a powerful lesson in this chapter. Pharaoh, by refusing to listen, he chooses arrogance and selfishness.
And Moses, in his humility and submission to a higher purpose, he chooses service, aligning himself with truth and justice.
Exactly. And what happens to each of them, it reminds us that those choices, they have real consequences, both in this life and the next. But it's not like our fate is set in stone. Smoke makes it clear that we always have the ability to choose differently, to learn from our mistakes, and to aim for a better outcome.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into smoke, what are some of the key things you hope listeners will take away from this?
Well, I think one of the most important takeaways is how connected justice and mercy really are. They're not separate. They actually work together to create a system that encourages us to be accountable while also giving us a chance to redeem ourselves and grow.
And even though this chapter comes from Islamic beliefs, those themes are universal, right? They speak to everyone's desire to make good choices, to find meaning and purpose, and to create a world where justice and compassion are the norm.
For sure. And ultimately, I think Smoke wants us to think about our own part in that effort. What choices are we making? What kind of mark are we leaving on the world for ourselves and for future generations? How can we help build a world that reflects our deepest hopes for justice, peace, and harmony?
We've just scratched the surface of this amazing chapter, but I hope this deep dive has made you curious, inspired you to learn even more. Smoke, it's one of those texts that stays with you, prompting deeper thinking and encouraging a more mindful way of living.
It's a timeless message that speaks to people across cultures and time, offering guidance and inspiration to anyone who's trying to live a more meaningful and purposeful life.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through chapter 44 of the Quran, Smoke. We hope you'll keep exploring its depths and find your own insights in its timeless wisdom.